Come, sit with me for a moment. I want to talk to you about something that most people never name out loud. Something that has been happening to you, perhaps for weeks, perhaps for months, and you have been blaming yourself for it, or blaming your circumstances, or simply lying awake at 3 a.m, wondering why everything that used to flow so naturally has suddenly become so impossibly heavy. You wake up tired even after a full night of sleep. You pray and the words feel like they are falling into an empty room. The people you love most seem distant or irritable or simply unavailable. And then, as if the universe decided that was not quite enough, something else breaks. Another bill, another misunderstanding, another door that slams shut just when you thought it was finally opening. You begin to wonder, is this just life? Is this just me? Am I doing something wrong? Sweetheart, I want you to hear me very clearly today. What you are describing is not weakness. It is not failure. It is not proof that you are unworthy or forgotten. What you may be describing is something the Torah knew about long before modern psychology gave us its vocabulary for suffering. What you may be describing is a spiritual attack. And the most important thing I can tell you right now, before we go any further, is this. The fact that you are being attacked does not mean you are losing. In the tradition of our sages, it has always been understood that the ones who are most aggressively targeted by the forces of darkness are precisely the ones carrying the most light. You are not under attack because you are weak. You are under attack because you are significant. If these teachings are reaching your heart, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel right now. We are building something together here, a community of souls who want to go deeper, who want to understand not just the surface of Jewish wisdom, but the living roots beneath it. When you subscribe, you become part of that community, and this community needs you. Click subscribe now and join us on this journey. Let me take you back to a teaching from the Talmud, Tractate Berachot, where the sages discuss something they call Tzarat Rabbim, which means the trouble that comes upon many at once. But there is a companion concept, one that is spoken about more quietly, which is the trouble that comes upon one person in waves, blow after blow, without rest, without interval. The sages noted that this pattern, this relentless accumulation of difficulty, was not random. They saw it as a form of what we might call heavenly pressure, a testing that was reserved not for the spiritually weak, but for those whom Hashem trusted with greater capacity. Think of the story of Iyov, whom we know as Job. In a single chapter of his story, he loses his children, his property, his health, and the support of his own wife. One messenger arrives before the previous one has finished speaking. Wave after wave. And the text is careful to tell us that Iyov was described as Tam V'Yashar, complete and upright, a man who feared Hashem and turned away from evil. He was not attacked because of his sin. He was attacked because of his righteousness. The darkness targets the light. It always has, it always will. And when you find yourself in a season where everything seems to be collapsing at once, the first question is not, what did I do wrong? The first question is, what is it in me that someone or something wants so desperately to extinguish? Now I want to be very careful here, because I am not saying that every difficulty in life is a spiritual attack. The Torah is not a system that turns every stub toe into a cosmic battle. Life has genuine hardship. People make mistakes. Circumstances are sometimes simply difficult, but there is a qualitative difference between the natural friction of human life and the particular weight of a season under spiritual assault. And that difference, my dear friends, is something you can learn to recognize. The Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalistic wisdom, speaks about the forces it calls the Sitra Achra, literally the other side, the dimension of concealment and opposition that exists in counterbalance to the light of Hashem. These forces do not operate randomly. The Zohar teaches that they are drawn to the places where light is about to break through, like a candle that flickers most violently just before it catches and burns steadily. A soul that is on the edge of a breakthrough will often experience its most intense opposition just before the transformation occurs. So when I tell you to recognize the signs of a spiritual attack, I am not asking you to live in fear. I am asking you to become an intelligent reader of your own life. I am asking you to look at what is happening around you and within you with the eyes of wisdom rather than the eyes of panic. Please activate the notification bell so you never miss a teaching. There are people who have told me that a video they almost didn't watch changed the direction of their life. I don't want that to happen to you in reverse. I don't want you to miss the teaching that was meant for you because the algorithm didn't send you an alert. Turn on the bell now, and I promise to keep bringing you the depth that you deserve. The first sign I want to speak about is the experience of accumulation, not one hard thing but many hard things, arriving together or in rapid succession. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 59, the text describes a state in which the adversary comes in like a rushing torrent. That is the image, not a single wave, but a flood. And floods, as anyone who has lived through one knows, are disorienting not only because of their force, but because of their speed. You do not have time to respond to one problem before the next one is already at your door. And the strategic genius of this form of attack, if we can call it that, is that it is designed to do one very specific thing, to shift your gaze. The sages of Musar literature, particularly the writings of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in his masterwork the Mesilat Yesharim, speak extensively about the danger of what he calls tiruf hada'at, the confusion of the mind, the state in which a person is so overwhelmed by the noise of their circumstances that they lose contact with the stillness at the center. And the center is where Hashem is. The center is where wisdom lives. The center is where you can see clearly enough to know what to do next. When the torrent rushes in, the attack is not really the flood itself. The attack is the disconnection from center that the flood is designed to produce. And so the defense is not to stop the flood, because you often cannot stop it. The defense is to maintain your connection to center, even while the waters rise. This is what our father Abraham demonstrated when he sat at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day, in the midst of his recovery from circumcision, and looked up and saw guests approaching. The Midrash tells us that Hashem had taken the sun out of its covering that day to give Abraham rest. But Abraham was not resting. He was watching. He was present. He was centered in his purpose, even in the middle of his pain. That is the first weapon against the flood of accumulation, the discipline of presence, the refusal to let the chaos pull you so far from yourself that you lose your footing in Hashem. Let me tell you about a woman I will call Miriam, though that is not her name. She came to me some years ago in a state of what I can only describe as spiritual exhaustion, In the space of 4 months, she had lost her job. Her mother had been diagnosed with a serious illness. Her teenage son had stopped speaking to her, and the small business she had been building for 3 years had lost its major client. She sat across from me and said, "I must have done something terrible to deserve all of this." And I looked at her and I said, "Miriam, do you know who in the Torah experienced the most concentrated suffering in the shortest period of time?" She shook her head. I said, "Joseph. Joseph, sold by his own brothers, enslaved in a foreign country, falsely accused by the wife of his master, thrown into prison and forgotten by the very person he had helped. Wave after wave. And yet the Torah tells us in the exact same chapters that describe his suffering, Vayhi Hashem et Yosef, and Hashem was with Joseph, not was with Joseph after the suffering ended, was with Joseph in the middle of the prison, in the middle of the pit, in the middle of the betrayal. The presence of Hashem does not evacuate when the attack intensifies. If anything, the tradition teaches us the opposite. The Shekinah, the divine presence, goes into exile with us. It descends into the darkness alongside us. Miriam began to cry, not from grief this time, but from something that felt more like recognition. She said, "I never thought of it that way. I never thought that maybe the intensity of what I was going through was not evidence of abandonment, but of accompaniment. Share this teaching with someone who needs it today. You know, someone who is in the middle of a hard season and doesn't know why. You know, someone who is blaming themselves for a storm that was never their fault. Forward this video to that person. Let this teaching find the person it was meant for." The second sign I want to talk about is isolation, and I want to be precise about what I mean, because not all solitude is dangerous. The Torah values hitbonut, the practice of deep inner reflection that often requires quiet and aloneness. The great tzaddikim, the righteous ones, often spent hours in what we call hitbodedut, intimate personal prayer in solitude. That kind of aloneness is nourishing. It fills the soul, but there is another kind of aloneness that does not fill. It empties. It is the aloneness that is not chosen, but imposed. The aloneness that arrives when the people who used to feel close suddenly feel unreachable, when you reach out and no one responds in the way you need, when you sit in the middle of a room full of people and feel completely invisible, when the friendships that used to sustain you have gone strangely cold, not through any fight or clear rupture, but through a slow, invisible withdrawal that you cannot name or explain. This is one of the most recognizable signatures of spiritual assault, and the reason it works so effectively is explained clearly in the Talmud, Traktate Ta'anit. Even a single blade of wheat cannot stand against the wind. Only when the stalks stand together do they have the strength to bend without breaking. We were not designed for isolation. The Hebrew word for human being, Adam, comes from the same root as Adamah, earth, ground. We are creatures of the earth, which means we are creatures of connection, of roots, of the network beneath the soil, where everything that is alive touches everything else. The adversarial force, whatever name you give it, understands this. It targets connection precisely because connection is our greatest source of resilience. And so, one of the earliest and most reliable signs that something spiritually hostile is at work in your life is the progressive erosion of your meaningful connections. Not necessarily through dramatic conflict, though that can happen too, but through 1,000 small frictions, misunderstandings, missed calls, withdrawn warmth, unexplained distance, until you find yourself standing in a field that used to be full of relationships and wondering where everyone went. The teaching of Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, says, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend. The word acquire, ainia, is the same word used in the Torah for possessing something of great value. Our sages did not say find yourself a friend as if friendship was something you stumble upon. They said acquire a friend as if it were something you invest in, something you work for, something you guard. Because in the tradition, your spiritual community is not a luxury, it is your armor, it is your shield. When the isolation starts to creep in, the response is not to retreat further into yourself and wait until you feel better. The response is the opposite, to reach toward connection even when reaching feels impossible, to show up even when showing up feels like climbing a mountain, to text the friend, to sit in the synagogue even when you don't feel like praying, to be physically present in the spaces where community lives, not because it will immediately fix the feeling, but because presence breaks the spell of isolation. Light drives out darkness, not by arguing with it, but simply by being there. You do not have to feel warm toward everyone in your community. You do not have to feel inspired every time you show up. You simply have to show up. Because the act of showing up is itself a declaration that you are not isolated. And declarations have spiritual weight. They rearrange the atmosphere around you. Now I want to talk about the third sign, and this one is perhaps the most tender, the most personal, the one that I have seen cause the most private suffering among the people I have spoken with over many years. It is the sign of prayer that goes dry. You have known what it is to pray with your heart open, to feel the words of the Siddur or your own personal prayer rising from somewhere real inside you, to feel that you are genuinely speaking to someone who is listening. And then one day you open your mouth and nothing comes. Or worse, the words come, but they fall flat. They feel like a recitation, like obligation, like going through motions in an empty house. And you think, maybe I have lost my faith. Maybe I never really had it. Maybe this is who I really am, and everything before was just enthusiasm that eventually ran out. My dear ones, I want to speak directly into that place in you. What you are describing is not the loss of faith. It is one of the oldest and most documented experiences in the entire history of Jewish spirituality. The great masters had a name for it. They called it Hester Panim, the hiding of the face. It is the experience of Hashem's presence becoming concealed, not absent, not gone, but hidden, covered. Like the sun on a cloudy day, the sun has not disappeared, but you cannot see it or feel its warmth. And the clouds, in this metaphor, are not your fault. They are part of the spiritual climate of the season you are in. The Psalms of David, the Tehillim, are full of this experience. Psalm 22 begins with the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? These are words of a man in spiritual darkness, a man whose prayers feel unanswered, a man who is calling out into what feels like silence, and yet the psalm does not end in abandonment. It ends in praise, in the recognition that Hashem was present through the entire experience of concealment. David did not wait to feel the presence before he spoke. He spoke into the concealment. He prayed into the silence. He kept the conversation going even when the conversation seemed to be one-sided. And that persistence, the sages teach, is itself a form of the deepest faith, Not faith that arrives when everything is easy, but faith that holds on when holding on is the hardest thing in the world. Practice this teaching today. In the next 24 hours, set aside 10 minutes and pray out loud, even if the words feel empty. Speak to Hashem the way you would speak to a beloved parent who you know is in the next room even though you cannot see them. Tell them exactly how you feel. Tell them that the prayer feels dry. Tell them that you miss feeling close. Tell them that you are still here, still reaching, still believing that they are listening. That honesty, that rawness, is not a sign of weak faith. In the Jewish tradition, it is one of the highest forms of prayer. The Baal Shem Tov taught that a prayer spoken with a broken heart reaches the throne of Hashem more swiftly than a prayer spoken with confident eloquence. The brokenness is not the obstacle, the brokenness is the opening. Before I continue, I want to ask you to leave a comment below this video. Tell me, have you ever experienced a season like the ones I have been describing? A season of accumulated hardship, or of sudden isolation, or of prayer that went silent? Write the word recognized in the comments if this teaching has named something you have been living through. I read your comments. I want to know that this is reaching the people it was sent for. Now I want to speak about something that ties all of these signs together, and that is the question of the Kelly pot. In the language of Kabbalah, Kelly pot, which literally means husks or shells, are the spiritual structures of concealment and resistance that surround holiness, the way the hard shell of a nut surrounds the soft fruit inside. The Zohar teaches that nothing of true value in this world comes without its kelipa, its surrounding layer of resistance. A grain of wheat has a husk, a fruit has a skin, a pearl is formed inside an irritant, and a soul that is being prepared for a significant purpose will always encounter the Kelly pot that are proportionate to the light it is being called to carry. This is not punishment. This is the structure of spiritual growth as the Kabbalistic tradition understands it. The forces of concealment do not attack randomly. They cluster most thickly around the places where divine light is most concentrated. And this is why the sign of being under spiritual attack is paradoxically a form of confirmation. It is confirmation that you carry something worth opposing. It is confirmation that your life, your choices, your soul's direction is significant enough to attract resistance. You are not being tormented because you are small. You are being tested because you are on the edge of becoming larger. The Torah was given to human beings precisely because human beings live in the space between the light and the darkness, because we know what it is to be under attack and to keep walking anyway. Every time you get up in the morning in the middle of a hard season and you say, Modeh Ani, I give thanks before you, living and eternal King, for restoring my soul within me, you are doing something that no angel can do. You are choosing Hashem in the dark. And that choice, in the tradition of our sages, is the most powerful spiritual act that exists. So how do we arm ourselves? How do we not simply survive a spiritual attack, but emerge from it, transformed, the way Yaakov emerged from his night of wrestling with the angel, wounded and limping, but carrying a new name, a name that meant you have striven with the divine and prevailed. The first weapon is consciousness, simply knowing the signs, simply being able to say, I see what this is. I know this. Pattern, this is not the end of my story. This is the test before the breakthrough. When you name what is happening to you accurately, You take back a portion of the power that the darkness was using against you. Darkness operates most effectively in ignorance. Name it, and you begin to shrink it. The second weapon is community, not the community that makes you feel good all the time, but the community that holds you accountable, that calls you when you have disappeared, that prays with you even when you don't feel like praying, that reminds you who you are when you have forgotten. In Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon writes, "Two are better than one, for if one falls, the other will lift his companion. But woe to the one who is alone when he falls, for there is no second one to raise him." That verse is not poetry. It is instruction. It is a spiritual law. Build your circle before the attack comes. Tend your relationships before you need them. Show up for others in their hard seasons so that others will show up for you. The third weapon is Torah study and prayer, and I want to say something specific about these that I think is often misunderstood. Torah study and prayer are not activities you do when you feel spiritually strong. They are activities that create spiritual strength when none exists. Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, one of the great sages of the 18th century, taught that the Torah is the life force of the world. Not a book about life force, but the actual life force itself. When you study Torah, you are not learning about divine energy. You are in contact with it. You are touching the source. And prayer, in the Kabbalistic understanding, is not asking for things. It is alignment. It is the practice of tuning your inner frequency to the frequency of Hashem. And like any practice of alignment, it works best when done consistently, not just when you feel it working, but especially when you don't. The fourth weapon, and this is the one that I find the most surprising to people who are new to this tradition, is joy, simcha. The Baal Shem Tov, whose teachings form the heart of Hasidic Judaism, said that joy is not merely a positive feeling. Joy is a spiritual weapon of the highest order. He taught that sadness and depression are among the most effective tools of the Sitra Achra, the adversarial force, precisely because they close the channels through which divine blessing flows. And conversely, joy, even manufactured joy, even the joy you choose before you feel it, opens those channels. This is the meaning of the verse in Nehemiah. The joy of Hashem is your strength. Not your natural joy, not the joy that comes easily when life is good. The joy of Hashem, the joy that belongs to Him, the joy that you access not from your circumstances, but from your relationship with Him. That joy is your fortress. That joy is your armor. Find one thing to be grateful for today. Just one. Say out loud, and then find another. Because gratitude is the practical expression of joy, and joy is the weapon that the darkness did not prepare for. I want to close with a teaching that has accompanied me for many years, and that I return to in my own hard seasons, because I have had them. I have them, and I will have them again. In the book of Daniel, the 3rd chapter, there is the famous story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the 3 young Jewish men who refuse to bow to the idol of the Babylonian king and are thrown as punishment into a furnace so hot that the soldiers who throw them in are themselves killed by the heat. And then the king looks into the furnace, and he sees not 3 figures, but 4, walking in the midst of the fire, unhurt. And the 4th figure, the text says, looks like a son of the gods. The sages and the commentators have long understood that 4th figure as the Shekinah, the divine presence, the accompaniment of Hashem into the heart of the fire. not pulling them out of the fire from a safe distance, not waiting for them on the other side of the fire, in the fire, alongside them, in the very center of the heat. That is the promise that I want to leave with you today. Not that Hashem will prevent the fire, not that if you are good enough and faithful enough and do everything right, you will never be thrown into the furnace. The promise is something better than that. The promise is that in the furnace you will not be alone. In the furnace there is a presence walking beside you that the darkness cannot touch. And when you come out, and you will come out, you will not smell of smoke, because what walks with you through the fire is not just a comfort. It is a protection that the fire itself cannot consume. May Hashem grant you the eyes to see the signs before they overwhelm you, the wisdom to name what is happening in your life with clarity and without fear, the courage to stay in community when everything in you wants to withdraw, and the stubborn, persistent, tender faith that keeps speaking into the silence even when the silence feels endless. May you know in the deepest place of your heart that you are not forgotten, that you are not alone, that the very intensity of what you are going through is a measure of what you carry and what you are being prepared for. And may the words of Psalm 91 be true for you today and always. He will cover you with his wings, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is your armor and your shield. You shall not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. I am Rabbi Shoshana, and I love you, and I will see you in the next teaching. Shalom.